In 1775, Thomas Paine wrote a pamphlet stating that the freedoms of men can only be maintained by limiting the power of government. The pamphlet was called Common Sense, and today it still is common sense.
I'm Ruth Zakaria.
I'm Mark Zakaria. This is Common Sense. Welcome back. Have you ever wondered what might happen in a Democrat primary if one of the contestants actually had the best interests of the people of the district at heart? Which side would win? Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you work, it's just impossible to get ahead financially? Do you think there's a diabolical plot behind that? We do. Have you ever wondered if an ethics commission complaint could conceivably get to be so big a deal it actually took down one of the insiders? We may be at the edge of that very cliff looking down. This week on Common Sense, we will have the details on all that and more. Plus, we will hear from State Rep Patricia Morgan. This week she presents an in-depth interview with financial guru Mike Riley as he explains in harsh detail just how bad things are at the state's pension fund, and especially that of the city of Providence. Between segments, Ruth and I will drop back in to lighten things up as we ask, then answer our usual satiric question, are you kidding me? As usual, this week's show will conclude with the musings of commentator Jeff Richard. This week, Jeff tackles Rhode Island's open meetings law. And in case you've been wondering where April Giarrusso has been on her vacation these last 2 weeks, we'll give you a little hint. Congratulations are in order for April and Tony this week, but next week it's back to work for her. Now let's kick things off with analysis of some of the top news stories affecting us here in the Ocean State this week. Ruth?
Thanks, Mark. A primary race is in progress among Democrats vying for the Rhode Island House seat in District 60, Pawtucket. Last week, a war of words broke out between the two contenders. What was the cause of this verbal Donnybrook, you ask? Why, whether or not to accept a federal grant of $13.1 million for construction of a new commuter rail station in the city. Wait, what? A Democrat suggesting we not accept a federal grant? It's true. Challenger David Norton took to social media to express his concern that the project was not well thought through and would ultimately result in more cost to Pawtucket than it would save if they took the free money. Well, that was all incumbent David Coughlin needed to get him to pounce on this upstart proponent of self-sufficiency. Coughlin issued a press release castigating Norton for failing to see that the quality of life in the city would be improved greatly by making it an MBTA stop. Then he piled on by accusing Norton of also suggesting the city decline state funds for road and bridge repair, as well as more statewide taxpayer cash to renovate McCoy Stadium. Since he was on a roll, or perhaps just for good measure, Coughlin also slammed his opponent for having once lived in Japan. The brute. Ohio gozimashita! Although I think that's a greeting. Anyway, David Norton may be new to the rough and tumble of Ocean State politics. All he could summon up in response was the position that building a whole train station just to get a downtown parking garage was a potentially inefficient use of scarce resources. You think? Norton went on to assert that realistic projections of ridership were needed before any decision could be made. Does that mean accurate projections? Oh, the double brute. Look, Mr. Norton, I'm from North Kingstown, and we have a nice, shiny new MBTA station down there that nobody uses. We could sell it to you for $13.1 million, so let's talk, folks. Challenger Norton is doing the right thing for his future constituents by looking after how well their money is spent. The incumbent knows that. He also realizes this ain't management of public resources, it's a political campaign. So I'm sure he's on the phone right now to the Pawtucket Board of Canvassers trying to get them to check David Norton's ID. Sounds like he's not really a Democrat. Mark?
Thanks, Ruth. Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever wondered why tens of millions in new taxes in the form of truck tolls were forced onto us when there was a clear option to pay for road and bridge repair using existing appropriations? Has it crossed your mind to ask why you and I are being forced to cough up $12 to $18 million worth of 38 studios bond repayments each year when there was a perfectly good commercial insurance policy in place to cover that contingency, whose premiums we are still also paying? Is that a question in your mind? the Speaker has famously accused us ordinary taxpayers of negativity when we've asked some of these questions. He thinks we are a mob of conspiracy theorists. Well, when a series of major tax programs are instituted with no rational justification, it's hard not to start seeing boogeymen in the shadowy halls of the State House. What irrational reason might there be to keep squeezing the wallets of the hard-working, tax-paying men and women of Rhode Island? Our economy is a double-edged sword, after all. The rise of American industrial and capital growth in the 19th century was a phenomenon that raised the standard of living all over our planet. In the absence of that kind of growth, though, our economy has become a millstone around our collective necks. Wage stagnation, coupled with these constant tax increases, serve to bind the average citizen to a hand-to-mouth existence, which leaves no real time for the ordinary voter to put any thought into the public discourse. We're too busy surviving to worry about any political esoterica, and that may be just what the lifelong elected class wants. Just look at what's happened in the national scene. President Obama was swept into office on claims that the Bush-era cumulative deficit of $9 trillion was so high as to be unpatriotic. Once in office, though, his administration set about more than doubling that to the $20 trillion we see today. Has that now become patriotic? Or has all that government spending created such a drain on the capital available for our private markets that we have just limped along at 1% growth, which keeps working people in economic chains? Is that where the big government types want us? In his book and movie, Hillary's America, Dinesh D'Souza claims that the current administration has intentionally used economic conditions as a slavery technique and that a Ms. Clinton administration would continue that. Are we far enough into conspiracy theory for you yet? Actually, I don't think that these current conditions are related at all to ancient aliens. I do think that an alien philosophy has crept into our ruling class, and it's one that's contrary to the individual rights promised in America's Constitution. So, your vote really means something this November, not just at the top of the ballot, but all the way down. Ruth?
Whoa. Speaking of negative. Thank you, Mark, I think. Okay, folks. We're all Rhode Islanders here. If the Brits are born used to standing in lines, or queues, if you will, we here in the Ocean State are born used to ethically challenged elected officials. But last week, one of them was outed in a way so creative and new that even jaded swamp Yankees took note. House Majority Leader John DeSimone had a complaint filed against him with the State Ethics Commission. That part's common enough around the General Assembly. What made this one stand out was that his own party was behind the filing. That's right. The progressive wing of the Rhode Island Democratic Party is not only challenging the long-serving incumbent to a primary, but they've also formally requested a ruling against him from the commission. And folks, this one's a humdinger. The complaint alleges that the property owned by DeSimone in Providence is chronically in arrears on property taxes. In fact, according to the city tax collector's office, the rep's office building on Smith Street was scheduled for tax sale every year since 2008. So was DeSimone's house at 18 Ralston Street in 2006, 2009, 2015, and 2016. Apparently, the gentleman likes to pay his taxes at the very last minute. The problem is, while he is in arrears, he technically owes money to the city. Like all legislators, DeSimone files an annual financial disclosure form with the Ethics Commission in which he discloses such things as outstanding debts. But did any of these back taxes make it to his filings in any of those years? Nope. And it gets even better. The progressives, who refer to themselves as the Democrat wing of the Democratic Party, also noted Rep. DeSimone neglected to disclose his role with United Providence and the legal fees he received for his work there. United Providence is associated with the city's school department and is the recipient of six-figure legislative grants each session. Isn't that what got Ray Galveston in trouble? So what are the voters of House District 5 to do? Do they want to ignore the fact that the incumbent has repeatedly ignored the law and rehire him anyway? Or do they want to sign on with the true believers of the progressive left and see taxes, bureaucracy, and regulation grow exponentially? Or, heaven forfend, do they want to vote Republican and really clean house? If so, they should have a look at Roland Lavalley as the sensible alternative to the drama that's blurring the D primary. Well, what do you think, Mark? Is this the year?
I hope so, Ruthie. But for right this minute, it's time to get on with the show. In just a couple minutes, we will have the first segment of this week's in-depth interview for you, courtesy of State Representative Patricia Morgan and her guest this week, financial expert Mike Riley. Before we do, though, stand by for some satire. Ruth and I are about to ask and then answer our favorite question, are you kidding me?
Ever see a dog being contained by an invisible fence? The trainers use what's called aversion therapy. The dog wears a collar that gives him an electric shock every time he gets too close to the buried wire. Zap! Oh, excuse me, just a minute. Nick, I know that you like to turn to the left, but turn it down a little bit by turning to the right. Okay, good. Fido doesn't like it any, but he does learn quickly. People, on the other hand, sometimes seem to just keep taking the shock. Are you kidding me? No, I'm not. Take Rhode Islanders, for example. Not long ago, we were treated to a public bond deal for 38 studios. The insiders handling the transaction did very well, thank you, but the amount of money that actually went to Curt Schilling's ill-fated software company was grossly inadequate for its needs. So the company went down in flames, and Rhode Islanders were left holding the bag. Zap. Oh. On this November's ballot, we'll come up against a referendum for a $20 million bond deal to finance expansion for the Port of Providence. The insiders dearly want to get a piece of that money as it goes by, but the proceeds will be, once again, grossly inadequate for the proposed work. Zap! We really ought to be able to see that kind of thing coming. How about the Superman building? At the end of the last legislative session, we all heard House leadership swear the public oaths that no taxpayer money would be used to refurbish that privately owned structure. But did you notice the item in the new budget creating the Rhode Island Infrastructure Bank? Who do you think's going to get that first payout? Zap! Our dogs would have been trained by now. Humans, on the other hand, are the species that created the expression, and don't you dare. Please, sir, may I have another? Are you kidding me? Thought this up. This was poorly planned. Whose big idea was what, we're still running, huh? Okay.
Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today we have with us Michael Riley, who is a financial advisor with two financial firms, both of which you started.
Yes, that's correct.
And one is Coastal
Management Group, LLC.
And the other is Beach Street.
Beach Street Financial Services.
And one of those runs a hedge fund, and you've been in financial services for a long, long time.
I started on the floor of the Chicago Board Options Exchange in 1973, the year the exchange was founded.
All right, so you know an awful lot about investing.
Yes.
Which is really good, because today I actually wanted to talk with you a little bit about the state pension fund, the Providence's pension fund, and also about some bond offerings that are going to be coming up connected with
Sure.
Roadworks.
I'm much more of an expert on the pensions than I am on the recent bond offerings, but I would be happy to give you
All
my
right,
opinion.
well, I'm sure you know more than the rest of us do, so let's just dive in. The state's pension fund, where is it now? What's its state of health?
So in terms of a funded ratio, which is the normal term used to determine any municipality or state's health, it's roughly 56, 57% funded as of right now, and headed lower. The reason it's headed lower is because our returns on the assets that are in the pension fund, funding the liabilities going out in the future, are growing less, not even growing at this point, and the liabilities are growing. They continue to grow.
So let's talk about that. We're supposed to make 7.5% in order to maintain it at, it was 60%, right? Funded?
Yeah, so
we had
that's
to make
a really
7.5% every year. If we make less than that, the funded ratio goes down.
Well, let's just talk about where Rhode Island stands, okay?
Okay.
So 50 states in the union, we're in the bottom 10, and that's after reform.
Of funded ratio?
Yeah.
Oh, so we're not
We're not
doing
even
well at all.
close.
Okay.
All right. So we, Rhode Islanders, say that the critical status level for our cities and towns and our state is 60%. Every major agency, Pew Trust, Moody's, they're up around 80%.
Okay.
Is what they consider a healthy funded. So let's just say the bar has been set very low and we're still below it.
We're bumping along and we're below it and we're going lower.
And we're headed lower.
And so we're not making 7.5% on the money
No,
that we have in there?
No. Over, since Magaziner took office, he has not made money, zero.
None?
None. He's the first in many, many years to have a negative return in a calendar year, and he's about to do it in a fiscal year. Now, if we did have a very strong market recently from
Yeah.
February lows to where we are now, bumping up against new highs, but amazingly enough, even with the stock market within a whisper of all-time highs, since he's been in office, we're going to show no growth at all, like zero.
So I assume that's because of the investments that are inside the,
It's completely because of that.
okay, it's completely because of that.
Yeah.
Wrong investments.
Yeah.
Can you, I mean, I don't know if you've looked at the choices inside,
Oh, I've,
which
yeah.
ones are not performing?
I have, and so the
Is it asset
experiment,
classes? Okay.
the experiment that Raimondo came in with in 2011, roughly, she put in most of her hedge fund investments in November of 2011. There's probably been 10 that have dropped out because of bad performance. One that was kicked out for political reasons that actually had good performance. But overall, the hedge funds have not done their job, contrary to the statements that come out of the
conventional wisdom.
Treasury. Yeah.
So they have done poorly. Now, let me just give a little pushback on this. Some of the endowments, like the Harvard Endowment, the Yale Endowment, they use hedge funds.
Yes, they do.
And they have kind of been a bulwark
Yeah.
against bad markets.
Yeah.
Did we just pick the wrong hedge funds?
Essentially, yes. But also, a pension fund is a little different than
From
an
an
endowment fund. So I advise endowments, I advise pensions, I advise foundations. So I recently advised a foundation that they could run their entire foundation with just 2 investments and be less risky than Rhode Island. So
Okay.
that just tells you that Rhode Island has a very complicated scheme that's built on academics, which might not surprise you, given our governor and former treasurer, and Magaziner, who has a little bit of knowledge about what that might mean, but professed that he was going to come in and with his expertise provide great returns, because that's the only thing that matters. He's done basically nothing. He's sat with Raimondo's plan, and it's starting to fail.
It's failing.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just talk a little bit. An endowment is different from a pension fund because the pension fund constantly has money going out to
Yeah,
the retirees. Is
Yes,
that it?
yes.
Yeah. So there's a constant flow of money, whereas an endowment, if they're not making a return, they can just stop.
yeah, they can stop using it for whatever they were using it for. And they probably have some kind of guidelines as to, okay, we can overdraw 1 year, but not 2, that sort of thing. The pension fund is in the condition right now that we actually have more money coming out than going in through contributions from the state and from the employees. Okay, so if we were to do nothing and not earn any money, our assets would go down because we're actually net drawing. It's the same.
And that's what's happening now.
That's what's happening now.
Money is coming in.
Yeah.
It's going out plus.
Right. So if you have a $8 billion pension fund, let's say it's $7 billion, and you have to make 7.5%, well, you've got to make 7 times 7.5, around $500 million just to hold the status quo on what they've projected going out 20,
Just to
25,
not
30
lose.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're trying to stay on this track. But when Raimondo did the reform, it was easily provable, and she even said it in her Truth in Numbers, I don't know if you remember that thing, that there was only a 47% chance at that time that they would actually achieve adequate funding over the next 25 years, and that was at that time. It's gotten worse.
And it's gotten worse
Yeah.
because the investments inside
I
are just
think
the
there's-
wrong investments.
Well, yeah, and in general, we're all butting against the idea you can't just make 7.5% because you want to. No one can make 2%. If you're in Europe, you're talking negative interest rates.
That's right.
So the 10-year German Bund is negative.
Actually, that's another case. I think a lot of the assets inside the pension fund are in cash. They
Yeah.
have to be in cash.
Well, they do because of their flows, their cash flows.
The flow is
Yeah.
going out, so you
Yeah.
can't keep it even all invested.
Right.
And if it's invested in bad things, it's going down.
They have to keep a certain amount of their
So
funds
it's not
relatively
healing.
liquid. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's very hard to catch up once you start to fall behind because that would mean excess of 7.5 returns. So, barring some huge bull market, there's going to be a problem.
And the practical impact on taxpayers is,
So for the state plan, I expect there won't be much that happens. I don't think the state plan is on the verge of, being liquidated or defaulted. I just think we're going to continue in this malaise of poor returns and the treasurer, whoever that treasurer might be, using that role as a political tool to give the right people the right asset allocations so that they can remember them in their next run for office. That's exactly what's happening, in my opinion, with Seth Magaziner. He doesn't want to be treasurer. He wants to be something else. This is his first step, and the whole thing he's doing right now is just to move on.
okay, well, with that, we're just going to take a break now and ask, are you kidding me?
Okay, I admit it. Up until I started doing this show, I'd thought of myself as something of a grizzled veteran of Ocean State politics. The kind of guy who's seen it all and is so long past being surprised by anything. Then I heard that there are line items in the budgets of every operating department in Rhode Island state government called departmental grants. Departmental grants? Are you kidding me? Sadly, it's true. As near as I can ascertain, there are varying levels of budgeted slush money at the disposal of each department head to basically just hand out as he or she pleases. Hang the Department of Administration's tedious purchasing policies. What could go wrong? Unless the answer to that question is the recent big money scam uncovered at DCYF. Even if it's all just a slightly overgrown petty cash account, the underlying philosophy of such undesignated funds is to abridge the basic duty of the legislature to appropriate money for public expenditures after due deliberation. I know. I'm always being accused of bringing up that pesky state constitution. I'm told all the time I should just get over it. And apparently the leadership of the House and Senate already have, if departmental grants have become the norm. But I can't. If I ever did, I'd never again be able to look you in the eye and ask, are you kidding me?
Welcome back to Common Sense, Rhode Island. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and I have with me today Michael Riley, who is a very smart man when it comes to financial advice
Thank you. I don't know.
and knowledge. We were talking about the state's pension fund, and you were mentioning the hedge funds, and that you thought they were the wrong ones. Not that hedge funds are necessarily bad, but the ones that were chosen are bad. And I just wonder for the folks if you could explain that and what would have been maybe better choices.
So there are two major factors regarding whether you want to choose a private investment, whether it be a private equity investment or a hedge fund. To me, they're both pooled investment vehicles of which a group of people manage the money and charge whoever's giving them the money some sort of fee.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with hedge funds is the idea of 2 and 20, which means the hedge fund manager charges you 2% a year just to manage the fees and takes 20% of any profits.
Okay?
Okay, so that means it's very expensive. They better be very good. So in theory...
Yeah, if they're making 200%, you don't mind them taking
Right.
something, but if they're not making,
Right. So generally speaking, Warren Buffett would say, and I would say, you don't want to invest in these hedge funds for pension funds because the likelihood over a period of time that those costs will be surpassed by the performance and the risk it's just very unlikely. So why would you even be involved in that? And so first attacks have been brought on by, various groups about the hedge fund space, because a lot of the hedge fund managers believe in taking defined benefit plans into defined contribution plans, against their own interests, by the way. So, so when people are looking at pension plans like CalPERS and CalSTRS, and they kick out all the hedge funds, the reasoning is, well, we're going to save all this amount of money in fees that we're paying to hedge fund managers. And we'll replace it with investments that we know about and we think we can replicate the returns. The fact of the matter is hedge funds have performed very poorly. But not all hedge funds have performed as poorly as some of the ones we've chosen here in Rhode Island. And so you would have thought that if Raimondo was particularly in favor of this hedge fund piece of the portfolio, it would have been because she was a venture capitalist, and I won't go into the ethics of what she did and kept her investment, but the hedge funds themselves, she should have had some insight into, or some reasoning behind the idea of adding the hedge. Right.
Yeah.
And they've turned out to be not great choices. For example,
well, not good for Rhode Islanders, and I'm just going to stop you a little bit because we did want to talk about some other things, but one of the consequences for taxpayers in Rhode Island that I see, because I'm on the finance committee, is that the annual required contribution is growing.
Right.
And that's money that taxpayers give into the pension fund. If the pension fund is growing, it's a smaller amount. But
Right.
since it's going down, it's a larger amount.
So
and it's going to crowd out other spending.
So this goes back to what we were talking about before. When we look at the funded ratio, and we see that the pension fund is roughly 57% funded right now, the actuaries will go back and they'll say, okay, you only have this many assets, you have this liability, therefore each year you're going to have to contribute at least a number.
Sure.
And that's called the annual required contribution,
Yeah,
or
we call it the ARC. That's right, ARC.
Right. So that's a number that is calculated by an actuary, but it's based partially in the current facts. So states...
It's the math.
It's the math, but states and municipalities know it's the math, and so if they want to fudge that ARC number so they don't have to come up with it at budget time, they keep an unrealistically high expected rate of return.
The 7.5 is unrealistic.
Right.
But that keeps them from having to put so much money into the pension.
Exactly.
fund.
That's been the problem for 20 years now.
But even so, leaving it at 7.5%, not increasing it or anything, right now, because the pension fund is going down, we actually have to pay more
Yes, you will have to
every
pay.
year.
So
and that does crowd other spending or tax relief.
Yeah.
It just does.
And don't think that, okay, so we have a $500 million shortfall roughly this year. That doesn't mean you have to come up with $500 million.
No.
That's amortized over a period of years. And so you might have to come up with 20 million more, or 30 million.
Yeah, I wish I could remember. I just know that it's more.
Yeah.
But let's switch gears a
Can
little
I
bit.
give you one more thing?
Sure, you can give me one more thing.
Because it just drives me nuts. In the February and the August crisis, if you were following the markets at all,
Yes.
it was very ugly. And our hedge funds were supposed to be the investments that would counterweight
That's
what was
right.
going on in the rest of the market. But yet we had two hedge funds that were investing in junk bonds and energy junk bonds in the middle of this huge decline. They were exacerbating the downturn. So these hedge funds were doing anything but hedging. So why were those part of a portfolio that's supposed to counterbalance what the rest of the portfolio does? I think they picked the wrong hedge funds.
Bad
Yeah.
choices.
Yeah.
You're right. Energy bonds, for the folks, means all of the natural gas companies, the people who are trying to supply those.
Yeah.
They borrowed a lot of money. And when the price of oil went down,
We became
They
more
went down with
exposed than we should have been.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so bad for taxpayers.
Just bad.
The choices were bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, is that it? Because
Well-
we'll switch, all right, you have one more thing.
No, well, I just want to point out that the state is not in a good condition with its current funded ratio. It is making its current ARC payment, and that will likely go up. I don't know what the mechanism is in the state for when they make that decision and for how long they make that decision. As far as the accounting rules are concerned, they're getting rid of the term ARC altogether. just so that you know, because they're trying to move what are now called soft debt, like pension fund debt, to hard debt. They're trying to put it on the balance sheets
Yeah.
of every city, town,
Well-
and state, and that's the new GASB 68 that's making them recognize that.
Yeah, and that's actually better for everybody.
Yes.
Because like you say, politicians have promised things because they know they're not going to be there when it has to be paid off.
And that's the happy, funny version. The sad, terrible, immoral version is that we have children and grandchildren who are shoving our debts onto them, and we're doing it knowingly.
And that people have made plans relying on those promises
The
as well.
people who are the beneficiaries, yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Right, everybody hurts.
They were promised, but you know, our kids, we kind of promised we're going to bring up our kids in a solvent society. We're not going to if we continue to do this.
No, we're not. So not good news for the state's taxpayers because the pension fund is not performing anywhere close to what it should be.
Yeah, it would help state taxpayers, for example, if we outperformed our expectations
Oh,
over
yeah.
a period of time. But there's no, in my opinion, no likelihood of that.
Okay, you know what? With that sobering thing in mind, sobering statement, we're just going to take a break right now, and when we come back, we'll have another topic.
Okay.
Okay?
For 8 years, we've been hearing about the Keystone XL pipeline. About the only summary I can give you on the long, complex public discourse on the subject is, are you kidding me? For all the time this project has been in the news, the federal government has been slow-walking the approval process while mumbling things. First, the State Department, under you-know-who, said under its breath there were grave international issues to be deliberated. Grave international issues? With Canada? The 51st state? Okay, ma'am. Do you still have that reset button? This time it might work. Then we heard offhand and nonspecific rumors of environmental concern. At the bottom of all that was the Green Movement's distaste with the production methods used to extract the crude in the first place. Fine, but it's Canada's country, and they're doing it. The question on the table is how to move the product safely. That's when the unsubstantiated anecdotes started to be about pipeline safety. Oh, stop already, will you? Right now in America, there are 2.5 million miles of active petroleum and gas pipelines. Right now, today, virtually all of the product that would be moved through the Keystone Pipeline already comes to America, whether we like the production methods are used or not. Only today, that crude comes to us in railroad cars or tractor-trailer tankers over the highways. There are nearly 100 pipeline accidents per year nationwide. There are that many tractor-trailer accidents most months. And while rail transport is safer, even it isn't as safe as pipeline transport. Nor are these current delivery methods cheaper than pipelines. In fact, they cost a good deal more, so they contribute to the high cost of finished products. But Warren Buffett owns the railroads that carry most of all the oil, and a variety of other insiders are profiting from truck transport. So international issues be damned. Environmentalists should look at all the crude spilled in far-flung locations from moving tankers, not from known paths of pipelines. Mostly our government shouldn't blabber at us about the greater public good when the real problem is your friends like the way it is, like the way it works today, and you really don't like fossil fuels as a political reflex. Until you make a real argument about what's better for the customers of government, all I can say is, are you kidding me?
Welcome back to Common Sense Rhode Island. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today we have as our guest Michael Riley, who is a financial advisor to two separate financial services firms. One is Coastal. And the other is Beach Street.
Beach Street, that's right.
You probably know more than most of us, 99.9% of us, about the financial markets. And I know that you have been really diligent about looking at our municipal pension funds. I know a few years ago, not that long ago, a couple of years ago, the Auditor General put out a report that I think at least 12 of our municipalities' pensions were severely underfunded and in serious danger. One of those is Providence.
Yeah.
And you've been looking at Providence really hard.
Yes, I've been looking at Providence very hard since 2013. And I discovered Providence's woes. I knew that it was bad, but I discovered a few other things that really lets Providence stand apart from every other city in the nation.
And before you go into it, why is that important to state taxpayers? That's Providence, right?
Well,
It's their taxpayers.
as a result of the laws that were passed in 2010, 2011, the general obligation bondholder is entitled to first lien on taxes for a municipality. So, for example, when Central Falls went broke, the state assembly came back twice and gave money to Central Falls to give money back to the employees to up their level of compensation to 75% of what it would have been. And then they made it actually sound like, okay, this is a precedent, you know, nobody should ever
Well,
lose
I
more than
mean,
75%, you know.
Yeah, go ahead.
But in any case, that happened, and it happened, you know, on the last day and that sort of thing.
So
But-
that could set a precedent so that if Providence couldn't make its payments, then the state's taxpayers would be asked
Right.
to
And if
make the
they're-
payments to
I
the
think-
retirees.
Yeah, I think if Providence were to, right now, dissolve its pension fund, have a problem, and we had to try to settle it, that the true liabilities of the Providence pension plan are in the multiple billions.
Billions with a B.
Yeah. And that that is certainly not going to be handled within Providence. They don't have the resources. They're bankrupt. So it's going to fall on the state taxpayers, not on the general obligation bondholders, because they're exempted. They're first in line. So it's going to go right to the state taxpayers. So you very much could have a situation where a Coventry firefighter or a South Kingstown volunteer firefighter will be paying state taxes to make up for the retirement of Providence firemen.
Well, just regular taxpayers would be
Regular taxpayers.
asked to pony
All of
up
us.
more money.
We would all be asked, and that amount is a lot of money. I think it's.
Billions is a lot.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's a lot of zeros.
Yeah, yeah.
So, okay.
But that's the way the law stands right now.
So how badly underfunded? We know their underfunded liability is in the billions. So they are in the teens for funding?
So they've had to restate their funded ratio, which we talked about with the state, which is 56%. And the critical status is, again, 60%. Providence has been in the low 30s, according to their own numbers. And it was recently restated because they've been lying about their own numbers.
They had taken money out of it
Yeah.
to further.
Well, and the
Things
Tavares
like that.
reform wasn't really what it said it was, and, you know, so a lot of numbers have been changed. So the official funded ratio, according to their own numbers, is 27.4%, which
really
puts
low.
it's lower than anywhere, lower than Chicago.
It's really
It's
low.
low.
You know, and one of the things that I know is if you have a small amount of money, and so say it's 27% funded.
Yeah.
And you double it, you're still only 54% funded.
Yeah.
And doubling will take
Well,
forever, especially if the
Assuming-
market's not growing and you're taking money out all the time.
assume the liabilities don't grow, which is a bad assumption, and
Yes,
assume
more
that
people will be
the current
retiring.
amount of assets that you're managing right now in Providence, that's 250 million roughly.
Sounds like a lot of money,
We'll
except
get to that in a second, because they claim a different number. 250 million, and let's say you make 100% in the market. Now you're at 500 million. So they go from 27% funded roughly to 50% funded, like, as you give the example. But that's not really what takes place. The liabilities continue to grow no matter what the market does.
so more money is coming out.
Right. We currently, right now, the way we're paying out of Providence, and I say we because I actually own a piece of property in Providence, but the way the city of Providence is paying out, they're paying out $108 million a year out of their pension fund for benefits, and the workers contribute $10 million.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, that's sobering.
Yes.
That's sobering. I didn't realize the
Yeah.
difference was so large. 108 million is coming out and only 10 million is going in.
Right, so to employees.
So you can't sustain
108
that.
million is going to retirees and benefits, and 10 million is coming in from the new workers, Now, the other contributee is the city, and there's two parts of its contribution. The normal contribution, which let's just say is also 10 million like the employees are. But it's
Okay.
actually a little more than that. And then the rest is what we talked about before, is that ARC, making up for what we didn't put into the pension plan, already paid for services. These people have already done their job, they're retired,
retired.
The whole thing, but we never put enough money into the pension plan in assets to make
So
enough to
that-
pay for it.
So it's just going down every year. It's just losing.
It just hit a new low, 250 million. And the reason I'm saying that is that's the Providence pension assets as stated by their investment commission, which is headed by Merrill Lorza. So he knows.
He knows.
And 252 million, that's what the advisor is managing. But yet Alorza.
say there's more
on
there.
June 30th of last year, and he will again on June 30th of this year, he'll tell you that there's 320 to 350 million in assets, and it's a lie.
Okay. Let me ask you, do you know how many retirees there are?
No, I'm gonna guess in the 2,000 range.
About 2,000?
Yeah, but I don't know. That's publicly available. You can get it also
Yeah.
in that report, the
Okay.
CAFR. Yeah.
So we've got real problems in Providence now.
Well,
So they're reporting more money than they actually have. The
Right.
money that they actually have, is it growing at all?
So yes, it's growing. They've actually done a better job in terms of rate of return on their investments than the state has.
Okay, that's good news.
It's good news, but they've also done it by having an outweighted bet on a single hedge fund that happened to do very well.
So risk.
So they took risk.
They took risk
Yeah.
to do it.
But they did, and they
it
got a
worked-
better,
worked
and it
out for
worked,
them.
and it got a better return. So my point about all this is
But
that.
taking on risk is not usually good for pension plans. Let's just say that, because people's lives depend on that pension fund, not only the retirees, but the people who have to contribute to it.
Yeah.
So taking on extraordinary risk is not something that,
But it's naturally what
I mean, they're
gamblers
lucky.
do. You double down, and that mentality gets into some investment commissions. Hopefully not into some mayor's heads, but it gets into their heads. But if you're being prudent, you don't do that kind of,
No, 'cause-
to a large extent, you don't do that.
okay. So where does Providence go? What
So
do they
Providence
do?
says, as I said before, they're 27% funded, and given that funding, they have to pay $70 million a year in ARC, if that's their funded ratio. But it's not. It's not their funded ratio. First, Providence is using 8.25% as its
Ooh, so
discount
high.
rate, yeah, which is misleading about the liabilities. Second, and most important, and is a securities law violation and fraud, is that they've overstated their assets purposely. That changes the ratio. If you take the 50 million out of the assets that they're overstating, then their ratio drops into the low 20s. If you take
I gotta have to stop you because we're running out of time here in this segment. But what you're telling me is they're in trouble, bad trouble.
real bad trouble.
Okay, we'll stop there.
So, Attorney General Peter Kilmartin is supposed to be the people's top cop. He's meant to be the last safety net before we are faced with chaos. Ouch. Are you kidding me? And we don't hear from the guy for years. Actually, he did turn up in a video clip from Sarasota, Florida in 2014. He was interviewed by a local TV station on some local issue. Right on the screen, it gave his name and listed him as a Sarasota resident. His opponent in the election that year tried to make a point with that tape, but it didn't stick. Now, as he's rounded the far turn and is heading home as our AG, Mr. Kilmartin tops off a 4-year, 38 Studios investigation by saying, "There's nothing to see here." Then he backs that statement up by refusing to release any of the evidence it took his office and the state police 4 years to cull through. So maybe there is something to see here, But you're not going to see it. There's a defender of the people for you. Now he's involved in a lawsuit filed by 2 good government legal teams from out of state. A.G. Kilmartin has refused to release documents to a Freedom of Information Act request concerning his agreement with as many as 24 other states' attorneys general to coordinate the investigation of those claiming there's no real problem with climate change. Huh? Is the AG's office really a part of a collaborative agreement to harass the doubters of unproven science? I guess we'll never know until the lawsuit is settled. The bottom line is, we've given the gentleman a prestigious position for 8 years, followed by a lifetime pension that's a good deal better than mine. And what did we get for all of that? Climate change and a game of hide the documents? Are you kidding me?
Welcome back. This is Common Sense RI. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and we've been having a conversation with Michael Riley, who is a financial advisor to 2 financial firms, and you've done an awful lot of work studying our pension systems, both state and municipal, and also 38 studios.
Yes.
And you've looked at it from kind of what the deal was with moral obligation bonds. I want to kind of talk about 38 studio bonds in relationship to the new Garvey bonds that are going out. Garvey, for you folks that are listening, are the bonds that we say we're going to be getting money from the federal government. So we're going to borrow money based upon the fact that we're getting that money. And by getting it early, we not only won't have that money in the future, but we'll pay an interest rate on it. But let's talk about the 38 Studios offering, bond offering. I actually read it, and I thought that the conditions inside were hostile to taxpayers. Very high interest rate, higher than, I mean, if you're guaranteeing people they're going to be paid, it should have been a very low interest rate. We paid 7 5/8, I think.
Yeah.
An enormously high interest rate. And then the other thing that was galling was that even if we wanted to say, okay, we don't want to pay any more interest, we were prevented from paying it off earlier or restructuring it.
So you're looking at it now and saying, what a mistake this was. I found out about it because someone called me and said, I don't know why it's like this, but you can buy into this bond. And here's what you can get. And I don't understand why you can get this and why the rate is so different from going rates in the rest of the market. Moody's rated AA. If you compared it to every AA bond in that time area, it was yielding 300 basis points more.
300 basis points is 3%.
3 full percent.
3% more.
Just way out of
The
whack.
folks who have savings accounts and are getting 0.5% will understand what that means.
You were getting a guaranteed 7.5, and beyond being guaranteed, the state then went in and said, okay, we'll give you enough money so that you can pay for your own insurance. And so they insured their bonds on top of all of this. Now, we decided not to invoke the insurance, which I have a real problem with.
Yep, me too.
Okay, but basically a
But-
bondholder it was almost like a treasury. I'm guaranteed 7.5% when the treasuries were 3.
Yeah. Enormously high interest rate
Right.
for a bond that was guaranteed, and we've seen in the paper just recently that that's what the people who were loaning the state the money thought. They said, we didn't even look at the company's spreadsheets because we knew we were going to get paid back, guaranteed.
And that would be the instinct of an investor like me. But even beyond that, you know the common sense. If something is so good and it just can't be true. That was my attitude. I was afraid of it because I said, this can't possibly, there's got to be some way that I'm going to lose in the end.
Yeah,
And
because
so
it was just too rich.
it was wrong. How could Moody's rate it AA? How could it, at the same time they rate it AA, have it be a 7.7% yield? It just did not make any sense. So for me, now looking back at this, there had to be some sort of tomfoolery between the rating agency and the state, and I think that should be investigated. And we have to look at 38 Studios for all of the things that it did wrong. You mentioned one thing earlier about paying off
All
early.
right, and so there's the other thing. Inside the conditions, it says they cannot be prepaid. So if, I remember when this was happening in the General Assembly, I said, well, why don't we just find the money and pay it off? At least stop the interest rate. Stop that interest rate.
Yeah,
You cannot. By the conditions that are put in the offering, you cannot do it. You can't alter it, because sometimes you can go and you can kind of like put out a second mortgage on it.
Right,
You take
right.
the same bonds, you make a different deal.
right. You
Can't do
you
it.
can refinance,
Cannot
is
do
what
it.
you're saying. Yeah.
Refinance it.
Well, this was a private placement. This was sent specifically to a group of institutions and individual investors who were told of what the investment was, but who were also assured they couldn't lose money. They were literally assured they couldn't lose money. I don't know who said that to them, or who said that to Moody's, or who said it to anybody. It should never be said. I mean,
never.
as an investment advisor, you could never say that.
Right.
But basically it was. And then we had our State House officials go up and visit Moody's and so on and so forth, and give their personal guarantee. I believe Piva Weed said it, a personal guarantee that we'll pay these off. That's
is-
when it became my moral obligation, and that disgusts me.
Well, more than your moral obligation, your obligation.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. So right on the front of that document.
Oh, it did.
The citizens of Rhode Island do not have to pay this.
It does say it. It's in a box.
Right,
It's actually bolded.
Yeah, but that's
so
not
that
what
you can see
Piva
it.
Weed said.
No, it isn't. And it's probably all of that stuff which has prevented us from really having an investigation. I've called every year for an independent investigation, and it keeps getting shut down. But for me now, I mean, I'm going to continue to do it.
Yeah.
The SEC has come in. Funny, the SEC can investigate, and they can find wrongdoing.
They actually are charging Wells Fargo and the Rhode Island EDC with fraud.
That's the
I think-
Securities and Exchange Commission.
Right. So that's the SEC. They govern the issuance of bonds. That's why I think Providence is violating the SEC, because they're misleading their investors.
They're not giving the real
Right,
numbers.
right.
So why this is really troubling to me, I mean, it's troubling to me because we should never have had the 38 studios. We should not be continuing to pay it. And we should have a real investigation by somebody who is independent and can get to the bottom of it.
Which is exactly what would happen if the insurance company stepped in.
But-
They'd hire somebody other than a Rhode Island General Assembly member or the Attorney General of Rhode Island. They would hire somebody outside and have a real investigation.
But they won't do that unless we say we're not paying anymore.
Right.
So
There's no
that's
reason-
why we keep paying.
Right.
That's why we keep paying.
That's the big cover-up, and it's
But-
been going on since Mattiello stepped into that chair.
Right, but, yes. But now we have $230 million worth of new bonding going out, which is the Garvey bonds for the roadworks program. How do we make certain that those very hostile to taxpayer provisions are not in these bond documents?
I don't know. I don't know what we can do. I do wish we had already gone through the investigation and seen exactly what was wrong with how we handled 38 studios, and we would know exactly what to look for. You mentioned one, the refinancing capability, but, you know, I don't know what we can do. I honestly don't.
Yeah, we just have to
One idea,
make them give us the documents before they make the deal.
well, some people have said don't issue moral obligation bonds, and if they're
Well,
going
and the
to...
Garvey is not going to be moral obligation, but still you
But
can
the-
write conditions into these bond documents that are not good for taxpayers, and I want to check it out, quite frankly. I don't trust them anymore.
Well, yes, that's right. And again, I don't know the specifics of a Garvey bond, but another thing you can do is you can have a dollar amount. If we're going to raise in a bond offering a certain dollar amount, I want a citizen vote. I don't want to just go through the assembly and have it passed on. So if we have
See,
a,
that's lack of trust.
Yeah.
It is lack of trust. And that's where we're stuck in Rhode Island politics today. We'll see you next week.
A recent article in the Newport Daily News highlighted some of the controversy involved in the Rhode Island Open Meetings Act, now some 20 years since it's had a thorough review. Seems there are those in Tiverton who believe that the provision of the OMA concerning executive sessions needs some adjustment. The article points out many of the ways government can slow you down. All government groups in Rhode Island have to conform to the OMA and publish agendas and then minutes. But like all aspects of human behavior, there are those who find a way to get around things. So the good folks in Tiverton are unhappy when an agenda item they want to talk to comes after all the routine business they have to sit through without falling asleep. Or an executive session is scheduled just before the regular meeting. If the executive session is to be after the general meeting, then some $400 an hour lawyer will have to sit through the routine until the executive session convenes. So what's best? If the executive session is first, then one of the prime reasons for executive sessions may be lost. That would be to allow the members of the executive group to gather and speak freely with each other, knowing the minutes would be sealed from public scrutiny. Now, I'm not sure that really happens in partisan committees and councils. Nevertheless, the rush to get through the session may cause less informed decisions. One suggestion in the paper was to schedule the executive session at 10 p.m. Most of us are home asleep by then, of course. Don't think that will work. Now, if you really want to get into the thick of open meetings, all you need to do is go to riag.ri.gov. Here you will find the Attorney General's Guide to Open Government in Rhode Island, 6th edition. It's all there. The AG has put together a reference guide to the judicial decisions, the statutes, and Attorney General findings and advisory opinions relating to the OMA. So you now believe you can read up on exactly what is the right thing to do when doing government business. I wish that were so. One of the premises to open meetings laws is the public has a right to weigh in when government organizations are making decisions on their behalf. Sounds great. So everything that is going to be talked about during the meeting is put on the agenda and published at least 48 hours before the meeting. But weekends don't count. Can't publish on Friday and have a meeting on Monday. You must indicate the date the notice was posted, B, the date of the meeting, C, the time of the meeting, D, the location of the meeting, and of course, a statement specifying the nature of the business to be discussed. That should cover it. But a whole bunch of little things can go wrong. In a court case, Rainey versus Warren Town Council, it was determined that the notice didn't contain sufficient information to apprise the public of the nature of the business to be discussed. And so it goes. It is no wonder we have a tough time convincing good citizens to run for office. The whole process of open government has tied a noose around their necks. I got elected for a 3-year term of office on the Portsmouth Water and Fire District Board by 1 vote. The board is one of the Rhode Island quasi-governments. 7 members on the board with a majority vote required to get things done. Now, I had to learn all about the open meetings law. First, I couldn't talk to the other board members before a meeting without violating the OMA. Ridiculous. So after getting the read ahead and wanting to push for a particular way forward, I couldn't. I tried sending emails to everyone presenting my conclusions. I didn't ask for a response, but the board majority told the district's lawyer to send a violation notice to the AG. Fortunately, the AG's reviewers found no merit in the case. There was no evidence I was trying to sway a quorum to vote my way, but of course I was. One of the bad parts of the OMA is the limitations on debate. By the time an issue is addressed in an official meeting, the time is not available to have a real open discussion, particularly if a bunch of us want a chance to talk. Now, I have been at town council meetings in Portsmouth that went on literally forever. I have become concerned that Rhode Island public officials have been given bad advice that has forced them into executive sessions at the drop of a hat. Lawyers love executive sessions. Town council and school committee lawyers looking to justify their paychecks will weasel word anything to frighten the elected officials. You should talk about this in executive session. Now, if I ever get elected again, I will promise never to go into executive session. Vote for me. Now, I do have a footnote. If you want to read about the ACLU's latest feeling about OMA violations, they published in February of this year, visit rifuture.org. The ACLU is calling for extensive amendments to the Act, and I agree. Thank you for watching, and God bless.